All right, folks. Hello, hello. If you can hear my voice, snap your fingers. If you can hear my voice, snap your fingers twice. Now we've just proven to our live stream attendees that we're really corny doing camp games here in Fort Collins. Thanks everybody for coming back from break on time. Thank you everyone who's joining us again remotely. We're going to assume most of you were joining us yesterday or returning today, but welcome to anyone who's joining us anew to the 16th Annual Conservation Finance Boot Camp, being held in partnership with Colorado State University and the University of Wyoming. We're pretty thrilled to have Alan Front taking us for a big wave surfing adventure in just a moment, talking about the torrent of public funding coming our direction, coming down the pipeline, so to speak. But first, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes for our remote attendees. One, we're just going to ask for you to keep your videos and cameras off. We see folks are already putting in the chat where they're joining us from, name and affiliation. Thank you for that. And as we go, if you have questions that you'd like to refer to Alan, Katie, sitting just outside of camera view here, will be relaying your questions to the room, to Alan, and as well for folks in the room. If we have questions as we go, and certainly at the end, we just ask that you wait for Julia to get you the microphone so that we can pick up the audio so that everyone is enjoying the same conversation and experience. Just a quick additional note, these sessions are being recorded and will be provided to all audience participants, hopefully next week. And then with that, I will just say, Alan Front, it is my pleasure to introduce you. We were just discussing, we're thinking he may have perfect attendance at all 18 boot camps over the last 16 years. So let the record stand until we contradict that. Alan, you are the person who's very hard to replace in the syllabus because you are one of the very few people who lives and breathes the Capitol Hill real talk about what funds exist, materialize, mature, or on the horizon beyond the kind of press release or announcement perspective. And so we're really thrilled to have your help understanding where we are, what's coming down the pipeline, what's real, what's imagined, and then some. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. And you all know that perfect attendance is a sign of unimaginative approach to life. But I'm happy to be here at number whatever it is. Lee has asked me to do just 3 things for you today. She's asked me to tell you where all the federal money is, to tell you how to get it, and to tell you how that relates to me, and to introduce myself. So I will start there and just let you know that I've been looming around the conservation community for only 38 years, starting in 1984, a literary year of some portent. And it was the Reagan administration, and so Big Brother might be a perfect analogy of our approach to conservation or some of the challenges that we faced in 1984. But since that time, I spent 25 years at the Trust for Public Land, and I think you've got other TPL folks coming to regale you with their thoughts this week. And have spent the last 13 years as a consultant, not just for TPL, but also for the LWCF Coalition, for Environmental Defense Fund, National Wildlife Federation, American Forest, a couple of other groups, focusing on coastal sustainability and restoration, on conservation and conservation funding, which is most attendant to our discussion today, on reforestation and carbon. And so I've appreciated what I've heard so far this morning. Great background for actually, in some ways, for some of the things that I'm going to mention. But I want to talk to you about those 38 years and honestly, how things have changed. Before I do, and in the event that any of you were out too late last night and are going to doze off after these first 2 minutes, I want to offer one overriding message that is the big takeaway if you get nothing else from my discussion this morning. And that is that in those 38 years, in those basically 4 decades of work in conservation, working on creating new funding sources, infusing conservation into the programs of a number of federal agencies outside of our traditional partners, working on broad policy issues, working to get the Land and Water Conservation Fund fully and permanently funded, and laying claim with partners to about $4 billion of place-specific conservation funding over those 40 years, which it's an impressive number until you break it down over 40 years, and then it's pretty pedestrian, but at least slow and steady. I can tell you that there has not been a better moment. I have not lived through a moment. You have not lived through a moment in these last 38 years that is more propitious, more opportune to get federal funding for not just federal, but also non-federal, state, local, tribal, nonprofit work. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about why that is and talk to you about some of those funding sources. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions? This was working a moment ago.
You just need to click on the presentation window because it's toggling between Zoom.
I, by the way, am a technical advisor to the Conservation Finance Boot Camp. If any of you need computer help, I'm available after this presentation. Thank you so much. So hopefully those of you who are online and all of you who are in the room will see a handful of projects on the screen. These are among the few hundred projects that I've had the great good fortune being involved in over these years. In the upper left-hand corner, and these are representative of some things I'm going to talk about today. Upper left-hand corner, you'll see 419 acres on the island of St. John's in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was the Park Service in holding, the privately owned property that split the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands National Park in half. It was hotly contested when a hedge fund guy wanted only to move the public away from the beach, put a 100-foot dock into the middle of Maho Bay and fill in the wetlands. That didn't happen because on a $32 million project, conservation organization I happen to be associated with, was able to lay claim to $9 million of traditional conservation funding and leverage that with a whole lot of private philanthropy to buy and set aside for the national park $32 million worth of real estate. In the upper right, that is almost 1,500 acres in Hawaii. It's 1,473 acres on the slopes of the Haleakala Crater National Park that was not connected to the east shore of Maui until these lands at Kipahulu were purchased, again with traditional federal funding. Lower left is much smaller, but I would say no less significant. 160 acres, $1.5 million. Why does it matter? Because it was an in-holding in the Coconino National Forest, and until it was bought, there was no public camping anywhere in the Sedona area. You could certainly stay at a resort, but you couldn't camp, and now you can. Lower left-hand side, that is the Chattahoochee River, which was a very small set of pocket parks along a river. It was basically for river access until the Trust for Public Land, Emory University, and a partnership of conservation organizations pulled together a grand vision to turn that set of small disparate parks into a 150-mile greenway stretching from Lake Lanier north of Atlanta through the city and south to Columbus. All of these federal acquisitions. And in 1984, what Big Brother was providing in terms of conservation funding was largely for federal purchases. Conservation has evolved since my early days in the movement. And so Peter Stein's not here yet. And David Hoffer, I think this might precede him, but a partnership between TPL and Lime Timber and a bunch of other folks helped the state of New Hampshire buy the northern 4% of the state, 149,000 acres. Forest Legacy is the program that fueled that purchase. It has done great things since. But again, this is part of the migration of federal dollars away, not just going to federal projects, but also going to state and local projects. Here you're looking at a major equity achievement with non-traditional conservation dollars. It was a $95 million trail that was established, the 606, formerly the Bloomingdale Trail. It's basically the High Line for the city of Chicago. And more than half of it, $50 million, came from a single transportation program having to do with air quality, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ program. I mentioned tribal. This is a 2,500 acre wild rice farm in northern Minnesota that was hotly desired by the Red Lake Band of the Ojibwa, who wanted it not just to train Ojibwa youth in traditional wild rice harvesting techniques, but also wanted it to create a business and to sell wild rice if they could get hold of it. They now have it. They have it because of some little known federal funding through the Department of Agriculture's this is not particularly urban agriculture and innovative production grant program. Even larger commitment to tribal equity came from Federal Power Authority mitigation funds. This is the Chief Joseph lands, the Wallowas in southeastern Oregon, where the Nez Perce tribe was exiled after the Nez Perce Wars of 1877. They spent more than a century not being able to occupy these lands until the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Program from the Bonneville Power Administration provided funding for a couple of large-scale ranches to be bought. That was then paired up with some acquisitions for the tribe of sacred lands along Wallowa Lake, including the place where old Chief Joseph is buried. And so, again, federal funding is different than it used to be. The future isn't what it used to be. And for a couple of reasons that I'll mention shortly, we are living in a ham and egg time that it would be a crime not to take full advantage of. I'd note that of those couple of hundred projects and those couple of $1 billion of projects that I've had the pleasure of being engaged in, most of that has been federally connected, federally funded, or federally, what was the term that Chris used? Adjacent. I like that word. And in fact, because of that, the conservation that has happened in these places and all those other places is very directly tied to policy decisions, funding decisions, administrative and legislative authorizations that have come from these places. And so we're going to get into some details, and I'm going to try to rip through because I thought that my clock was a little bit longer than it is in today's session. So I have too many slides, not enough time, and I do want to have time for questions. And I know there's a microphone that can circulate. So if anyone feels a desire to pipe up, please just raise your hand and you're in. That's all it takes. But I want to set the stage by talking about the federal budget. What kind of money is available overall, not just for conservation, but overall coming out of these buildings? Anyone have a clue of how big this beach ball is in dollar terms? How much money did the federal government spend last year? You don't have to. When the Trump administration started, we had basically a $4 trillion annual budget. By the time the Trump administration left, that had risen to about $4.7 or $4.8 trillion net of COVID and other emergency relief. When you load the rest of that money in, it's more like $6 trillion. Last year, the government spent about $6.1 trillion. I feel compelled to explain this just a little bit. The blue pie wedge is just Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That was almost $2.5 trillion last year. It wasn't that long ago that the entire federal budget was $2.5 trillion. Now that's just 3 entitlement programs. What you see in yellow are additional entitlements, nutrition programs, ag subsidies, highway trust fund, airport trust fund, and a good deal of mandatory relief that has come through COVID. The spend out of CARES 2 funding, And that chunk is going to increase or stay high for the next 5 years because of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we'll be talking about a bit more today. The interest wedge is about $350 billion, or was last year. You can expect that to skyrocket now because of rising rates. Defense spending was about $750 billion last year, and domestic discretionary spending, about 12% of the budget. The total budget was about $650 billion. Where's conservation in that? Well, there is a little green stripe that those of you with excellent eyesight can see. In case you can't, here's a visual aid. When I talk about the dollars going up, that wedge in how many, 16 or 17 previous presentations here, that wedge in raw dollar terms was about $7 or $8 billion over the last few years. Now, I would say conservation funding that is directly related to conservation and closely related because it's so available for conservation if we only ask, is more like $15 billion. It is essentially doubled. And so it is a fly speck in the overall budget, but it is what Robert Frost called a considerable speck. It is a meaningful amount of money, and the increase creates huge opportunity that we're going to talk about in the context of what has already happened. Of a microphone request.
And name and affiliation again today for conference.
Bert Hunter with the Green Bank, Connection Green Bank. Is that recurring program money, or is any of that special, the 15 billion?
I would say at this point, it's baked in for at least the next few years. And that's largely because the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, was 5-year money. That does not even include the possibility that Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer are going to come to agreement, which I think is, call me a pie-eyed optimist. I'm actually, I think, a realist. I have been in discussions with principals, and I will tell you that there's a decent chance that they're going to have a bill announced in the next week, and that something might be on the Senate floor before August recess in terms of reconciliation bill that would produce maybe the last big gasp of discretionary money before things tighten down starting in the next Congress. I am not going to go through all of this. And you have these slides, I think, so you can look at them at your leisure. What I'll share with you is that this is a small sampling of conservation programs, available conservation programs. And you'll note that there is a Valentine-like annotation on some of those items. Just briefly, I'll share with you the programs that are in solid green have, over just the last year or two, received a huge infusion of new funding. All of the top 5 that you see there were funded through the Great American Outdoors Act and that full funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And you'll see more in a minute that has gotten funding because of what's happened recently. Then what you see in crosshatches, those are programs that have also gone up in recent years, but not because of legislation over the last couple of years, because of other dynamics. Dingell Johnson and Pittman Robertson, they depend on taxes on outdoor gear. People have been buying a lot more outdoor gear, including more guns and fishing tackle, which is what largely funds those. The Obama gun crisis, the rush to, every time there's a Second Amendment threat from, or a suggestion of a Second Amendment threat, the Pittman Robertson program goes way up. And so also in a similar vein, the Migratory Bird Conservation Fund, which I'm going to talk about a little later, so I won't dwell on here. That fund was increased in the early 2010s, I think it was 2013 or 2014, by legislation because sportsmen demanded it. They wanted to be taxed higher. That money, the money comes from duck stamps. They begged Congress to double the duck stamp fee that they had to pay every year, so that more money would be available for conservation, especially for what they call production habitat, so that they could actually, that would result in a greater number of animals to take. those were all more traditional conservation funding sources. We're starting to edge into things that are less traditional. Some of them have to do with economic development. Some of them, oh, and I didn't tell you what heart number 3 is. I apologize. The hearts that you see that are shaded, those will increase to by orders of magnitude if a Build Back Better or Build Back Slimmer reconciliation bill is passed. So increases in those programs may depend on whether or not Democrats can agree with Democrats and get a bill across the finish line. But now we're looking at farm bill programs. Many of them originated as basically just a different form of support for farmers and ranchers. They have become much more than that, which we will be talking about. NOAA programs, I'm not going to get into these, but I will tell you that there's an extra $100 million in Pacific Coast salmon recovery because of the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and $274 million available for coastal zone management activities, including what was the moribund and is now the revived coastal and estuarine land conservation program. But wait, there's more. You're going to be hearing from folks this week about the REPI program and the spectacular partnerships that it creates. I'm going to talk about those for a minute or two later on this morning. Army Corps mitigation money, that hard green heart next to the BRIC hazard mitigation program. The BRIC program was established as a successor to the pre-hazard mitigation program that FEMA badly ran. It started out at a couple $100 million. It rose to $500 million. It's now at $1 billion, and it's going to be $1.5 billion for the next 5 years because of infusions of money. Hazard mitigation, it's a place to look for federal money. The drinking water and clean water state revolving funds, I'm going to mention them a little later, so I won't dwell on them now. You're also going to hear, I think, a presentation this afternoon about them, right? Transportation money, including multimodal transportation money, including increases to what some of you will recall as transportation enhancements in the original ICE-T legislation in 1991. They've turned into transportation alternatives funding. That's the term of art now, but that funding has gone up significantly. And then this new Protect Grant program, which I think if I have time, I'll mention as we rip through some of these examples. But there is just a huge palette of federal conservation funding. So where's the money? It's everywhere. How do you start tracking down money that's everywhere? Well, here's one place to look. Some of you oldsters, and I'm looking around and I am not seeing oldsters really. Kent, David, my contemporaries, you may remember a huge loose leaf binder that the government used to put out every year called the Federal Catalog of Domestic Assistance. It listed a bunch of federal programs that you could go after money for. It was not searchable. It was not user-friendly. That has been replaced now with a website that you should all be aware of if you're interested in federal money. SAM.gov is imminently searchable. This is the beginning of a quick search on conservation easements. You can put in water conservation. You can put in any term of art. It is Boolean, whatever that means. Look at all you nodding your heads when I say that. I am out of my technical depth for sure in this room. But it is a place to start. I'm going to linger here for a minute and talk about other places to start, because it's important to take a look at the projects that you're working on if you're looking for distributed federal funding, or you're looking for unusual comfort in unexpected places, unexpected federal places. It's important to take a hard look at what resources you have on the assets to be conserved. People have been talking about co-benefits. Sometimes they're not co-benefits. If it's the benefit that's going to get you money, it's the benefit, and everything else is the co-benefit. And so you may be working on a community project that is designed to provide for open space for disadvantaged communities. But if that project provides protection for transportation infrastructure, you might want to lead with that, because right now that's where the money is. Willie Sutton, by the way, did not say that that's why he robbed banks, but he did in his book, Where the Money Was. Awesome. He did say, I never felt as alive as I did when I was in a bank. I don't think he was talking about like depositing his paycheck. That is another place to start. I would just advise you that whether it's you individually or folks in your organizations, the way to find this money is to have a love of the chase, to feel excited when you're in the bank and when you're about to try to pick the lock. Some of you do Wordle. Some of you like to puzzle things out in different ways. It matters, because if you have the thrill of the chase, then you'll find the money much more easily than you will if it's a daunting task to start piecing through all of these potential funding sources. A last first thing that I'll note is that as I talk about some of the examples that I'm about to raise, you'll note that many of them have layered funding, that many of them where many of their federal participants are leveraged against or with private dollars, state dollars. Sometimes it's because of a requisite match. It's not always because of a requisite match. Sometimes it's because it's easier for a federal agency like anybody else to throw their money in if they're not the only money in. I said that was going to be my last first thing, and here's a last first thing, a postscript. The previous presenters, Steph and Calarose and Chris, made clear that when you're working on carbon credits or carbon partnerships, even if they're not registered credits, that you've got to know your audience, that you've got to understand what people want. I imagine that sometime this week you'll be having discussions of philanthropy and donor-oriented fundraising. Well, it's easy for us all to think that all of our other partners, except for our government partners, are the ones that we have to have relationships with and figure things out and understand perspectives of. It's also easy just to think of ourselves in relation to federal decision makers as supplicants. Yeah, we line up at the trough and we've got the constituency, we've got the power of the project, we have the press clippings, and we've got a congressional delegation that's going to help us get the money. You need to understand what decision makers are, how they're basing their decisions. And there are, for every one of these programs, whether they are explicit or inchoate, there is a set of decision-making markers that those folks are thinking about. And so this is all, you all are deeply experienced. And so I feel like I've gotten that out of the way, but I would list those out as some cardinal rules, just not to forget as you're thinking about how to navigate the complexity of multiple funding sources. First of the multiple funding sources that we're going to talk about is the big kahuna of conservation funding, federal conservation funding, LWCF. It is now celebrating its 57th anniversary. It has been on the brink of extinction a few times. Some of us have worked on full funding for 38 years, making me candidly the least efficient lobbyist in federal conservation, but it's now done. And with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, there's serious money in the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I won't go through these details, but it's split up into a couple of different sub-programs. Those sub-programs all have their own rules. They all have their own benefits. Some of them, like the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, are specifically focused on equity goals. Some of them, like federal land acquisition, are specifically focused on whatever federal land managers need to actually have a manageable and useful unit. Again, different rules, different focus, different programs. We'll just be aware of those differences. And then when it comes to the funding, I think this is clear, and I'll breeze through this. But the Land and Water Conservation Fund, based on this elegant idea that as we sell off federal assets in oil and gas offshore that belong to everybody, that everybody ought to get some benefit out of it.
The marina and how.
That's why a portion of that money goes into land and water conservation.
Oh, good. Well, good timing. I'll go up to my office.
That money has been coming in regular as rain. That has not been the problem. Offshore oil revenues have averaged $4.5, $5.5, $6 billion a year. They've been as high as $18 billion a year. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is supposed to get 900 million of it. In fact, it has. There's a credit in the account of the Land and Water Conservation Fund every year before GAOA, before permanent funding, that said, you've got $900 million of new money. The issue is that in order for that money to be unlocked, Congress had to spend it. And so Congress didn't spend it. It remained just a paper balance. That's changed now. And so what was between the 900 million of annual deposits through regular LWCF, and for those of you who are particularly focused on these details, about $100 million that comes in every year now regularly through the Go Mesa portion of LWCF. There's $1 billion that's come in every year, and about half of that has gotten spent and half of it has been a bathtub ring.
Can you just describe the acronym Go Mesa? We have a swear jar for acronyms at the moment.
It's the Gulf of Mexico.
Explain the rules before, Alan.
It's okay, I'm in. Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. Go Mesa. It was passed in 2006. And it provided for some dedicated money for Gulf states that are producing oil and gas, and some money for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, specifically for state purchases. So that's how LWCF got tangled up, and this is how it got, and the Great American Outdoors Act is how it got untangled. It got untangled by this man. Now I'm just going to note, this is a casualty list photo. Rob Portman retiring. Martha McSally defeated. Jeff Fortenberry indicted, now convicted. Federal officials having moved on. I don't know where that little girl is now. I do know how to find the latest commentary from the man who's sitting and who's signing the Great American Outdoors Act. Corey Gardner defeated by John Hickenlooper in Colorado. Sadly, Don Young, who is a stalwart for conservation and very colorful figure in the process, passed away as the longest serving member of Congress. And Steve Daines, who is a friend of conservation and of mine, is kind of the last man standing of the people who were surrounding the president. I will just note two things about this event. I was in this room, it's the East Room of the White House. I was 4 feet away from the maskless president of the United States. This was during the height of COVID, when there were no vaccines and no therapies. It was also exactly 6 weeks before the Amy Coney Barrett super spreader at the White House. And so early COVID was a game of inches, and those of us who attended that skated by, dodged a bullet. But it is on account of that president and some particular dynamics that I can talk to people about over lunch that the Great American Outdoors Act and LWCF actually were secured for heavens and the future's sake. Why did LWCF have to get permanent, dedicated $1 billion a year appropriations? Because this is what it looked like before then. This roller coaster made it impossible for landowners, communities, all of you to effectively plan for large scale conservation, for landscape scale conservation. Yeah.
Just gonna keep heckling you. 7-minute warning,
7 minutes before.
Q&A, etc.
We're going to go so fast and skip a few things then. So I am going to actually not talk to you about these remarkable Land and Water Conservation Fund projects that represent federal conservation, a new wildlife refuge, 38,000 acres, $25 million. It's going to be in the public's hand on July 11th. State parks, including historic parks, equity investments, $350,000 in one of the hard scrabble parts of Bridgeport, Connecticut, to take what was a terribly, a park in terrible disrepair and actually make it a community asset. 14,432 acres that would have been, honestly, 3 golf courses and 9,500 houses in northern Idaho, and is instead protected as continued timber production lands to maintain the historic timber economy, while also providing protection to some of the most important pocket wetlands in the upper the northern Rockies. Water quality protected through an endangered species program. This is the water supply for whitefish, but it also hosts grizzlies and bull trout and Canada lynx. So the Fish and Wildlife Service kicked money in on that. This is an $11 million grant in Southern California through the Cooperative Endangered Species Program under LWCF that, by the way, the state is not going to use. So there's $11 million more just sitting there for all of you. You heard it here first. Yesterday was the day that they decided that they were going to take a pass on federal funding. So, and this is not only habitat for 4 federal endangered and threatened species, but it also has tribal equity implications and is in, it's surrounded by the worst parts of 3 Southern California cities in the LA area. So LWCF, that's a place to look. And you got to know the rules. Migratory Bird Fund, I mentioned some of the rules, so I won't keep mentioning them. I mentioned that the money went up, so I won't mention that again. But I will just tell you this about this cool project for a moment. This is the property in Louisiana. It was known as the Chicago Mill property, previously the Singer Tract. Those of you who are birders know the Singer Tract because it was the last place with a verified sighting of the ivory-billed woodpecker anywhere in the world. There maybe was a sighting in Cuba, and most people think that that was fake. So this is the property where the Lord God bird was last seen in 1938. It also is critical habitat, although abused habitat, for the Louisiana black bear, which was a federal threatened species. The Louisiana black bear doesn't like sugarcane lands and oil rigs. Louisiana black bear likes trees. And so this 10,900 acre property, $15 million of acquisition need, and another $8+ million of reforestation restoration need. The Fish and Wildlife Service didn't have that kind of money. They kicked in about half the money for the acquisition itself, about $7 million. The rest of the money came, and I shudder to talk about this with so many climate experts in the room, but in the early 2000s, before RGGI, before California Climate Registry, there was only one registry, is the Chicago Climate Exchange. Duke Energy, Entergy, a couple of other energy companies, had the foresight to say at some point we're going to want credits. They spent the extra $8 million to buy this property. They spent the other $8.5 or $9 million to reforest it, and they registered credits in Chicago. As a result of that, there are now 3.9 million new trees on the Tensas Wildlife Refuge, paid for by private parties, by energy companies, and the Louisiana black bear is delisted, largely because of this one land acquisition. The SRFs, you're going to hear about them more. I'm in a hurry, so I won't talk much about them except to tell you, huge capitalization, $24 billion in the drinking water SRF, $50+ billion that's been appropriated to the clean water SRF. Those are dollars that are deposited in states. The states get to manage those funds in a way that that cleans up degraded water, improves water quality, and also drinking water supplies, quality and quantity. It's a revolving fund. The revolving funds can be forgiven by a state under certain circumstances, especially if there are disadvantaged communities involved. So it can be grant money. Did it go up? Has it been going up? Well, Congress has been putting more money into it every year, but that's not enough. When the IIJA was passed, they put a huge amount of money into it. And so you can see every year the drinking water SRF gets about $1 billion, and every year the drinking water SRF gets about $1.5 billion. Under the IIJA, under the bipartisan bill, Congress said, why don't we take another almost $2.5 billion and plunk it into each of those SRFs for the next 5 years? What this means in terms of getting hold of the money is that programs that were previously oversubscribed may not be anymore. And so it makes a lot of sense to look at where there have been these huge upticks in funding, just to figure out whether there is a linkage. And those linkages are sometimes harder to find, but very, very fruitful. Everybody knows that New York has been spending SRF money ever since the SRFs were created to protect their watersheds in the Poconos and the Delaware system. I've had the pleasure of working on some of those projects. I did not work on this. This is a conservation fund project in which the Conservation Fund bought a huge slug of redwoods in far northern California, in an area called the Lost Coast, where Highway 1 veers away from the coast. Spectacular fog forest. And there's some very small local water systems that are dependent on this. There also was a crying need, and the state saw this crying need to protect these redwoods before they were gone. And so the state invested money on a revolving fund basis in land that's now owned by the Usal Redwoods Company, and they are paying that SRF back out of sustained yield timber receipts over year by year. Nature Conservancy is doing something similar. Again, this is one of the few projects that I'm showing you that I haven't had anything to do with, but it's just spectacular what TNC has done with the state. They've got this preserve that is not focused on clean water. It's focused on critters. And Chris was talking about those various focuses. Their focus is on, Nature Conservancy's focus is not on making sure that they're clean, the waters are clean for academic reasons. They want clean water for the species. How many minutes?
Technically 0, but we can give you 2.
I'm going to take 4. Clean water project that I was involved in, it was just cap off money. Communities in the state of Massachusetts were throwing money in to protect their water system. Clean water, safe drinking water, $600,000 on a $9 million project. Sometimes it's just top off money. And this I do have to talk about, and I don't know if Peter and others are going to talk about it later, but this is something that I was involved in starting in 2001 with the state of Ohio. They have these programs in a few states. North Carolina has one, Ohio has one, Iowa has one, called sponsorship programs with the SRFs. There's a lot of flexibility in how the SRFs are managed. These states have decided that they're going to use the SRF as an active, a proactive, if that's a word that you can stand, I can't, but an active approach to conservation. And so they've gone to anybody. If you've got a sewer system and you need to do upgrades and you want to borrow SRF money for it, the state of Ohio gives you 2 choices. You can borrow the money at 1.9% interest or whatever it's about to be, or you can borrow money for free as long as you take the carry cost that you would have paid on that interest-bearing loan and give it to us so that you can sponsor a land acquisition. It's genius. It's basically just drawing down that money and putting it into water-oriented conservation. And so Ohio has done that a couple of dozen times, and it is an interesting wrinkle that you should ask Peter about when he has time, since I don't.
And only because we're going to hear from Kristen tomorrow on refuge.
We're skipping this.
So Alan, one question I just want to inject here is, we talked a little bit in the prep for this conversation about kind of the special sauce, not just of knowing that these funds exist, but in terms of building the support for your proposal such that you actually have a reasonable chance of getting the funds. And you being a font of wisdom on the kind of, or perhaps the recipe book on the special sauces associated with some of these funding sources. Can you just talk a little bit about educating perhaps the decision makers about projects and proposals, kind of building the support needed to rank highly, how to kind of read between the request for proposals or the funding announcement to understand what they're really after, and how to go after the meetings with the people who are making those decisions to understand exactly how to build your project to meet the criteria. So secret sauce recipes, pretty please.
I will answer that quickly while I then flick through a couple more slides. The sam.gov website that I showed you is selection of what are called NOFAs or NOFOs. When Congress passes a program, when an agency says, okay, here's the rule book by which we're going to let you apply, it shows up there. They are cold, analytical, soulless. They do not get you money, but they're a place to look. It is a place to look just to know what the rule book is, to know that this NOFA is open for 60 days. And then the funding is actually going to be, the funding round is going to get closed. So that's important, but I would suggest, I on my last slide, I have my phone number, which I will click to because you can call me. You've got to have a sense of how these different programs work and who's making the decisions. And you have to remember that these are people. I remember when we were first establishing, Bruce Babbitt had established the Cooperative Endangered Species Program and a new regulatory approach to new regulatory and non-regulatory approach to endangered species. He went to the Pacific Northwest and said, this is a 78-acre property. It is not subject to a 4D rule. You cannot cut any trees on it because it has spotted owl and marbled merlin on it. Then he went to San Diego and said, we are going to establish a bold new way of protecting species. And so if you have property within these lines under a habitat conservation plan, which was born in 1991, we have an avenue for you to do development, even if you will trash habitat. But in order to do it, we have to have a guarantee that sufficient habitat is going to be protected to allow for the loss of that habitat and for potential injury to those subpopulations. There isn't jeopardy if we've protected enough that we can let some of it go. And so after that happened, and before that happened, there were intense discussions between San Diegans and Trust for Public Land and Nature Conservancy and folks at the Department of Interior. And it was basically a conspiracy where we all agreed we can actually deliver this. We can deliver these commitments. More than that, we can deliver above and beyond conservation through Habitat Conservation Plan grants. If you give us half the money, we'll get the rest of the money from the state or from landowners, and we'll actually expedite recovery of species. Those secret sauce, I would say that it comes down to one word, and that is conspiracy. You've actually got to dig in with the agencies and actually and understand what they're trying to get and give them a better way to get there, which is what they do, for instance, in the ASEP program. I don't think there is anybody talking about ag conservation this week, is there?
A lot of regenerative ag, but not an easement.
Okay. So you're looking right now at a 19,000 acre property that is still owned by a Salt of the Earth conservationist who is using money that he's getting through an easement program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service to upgrade his habitat, to do further restoration in an area in Arizona known as the Sky Islands. Unrivaled habitat, a unique biosphere. Here closer to home, Bill Trampy, another great guy, has sold easements and select fee over 6,000 acres on his ranch to the state of Colorado. GOCO, which is of course the Great Outdoors Colorado program, GOCO kicked $10 million in for that program, but the initial commitment was out of NRCS. It was $3.8 million out of the Sage Grouse Initiative. And because Bill's a good guy, it's not just typical ag easements where he gets to keep on farming and he gives up his development rights or ranching. He's actually said, I want full public access because people want to get to the Gunnison River. And so these programs have multiple benefits. I'm going to answer another question, then maybe sneak through one more thing, and then I'm really going to be done.
I'm just going to ask you to conclude. You might kick and scream a little, but we only have 7 minutes for all discussion and questions before we have to end the session.
I can name that tune in 2 minutes. So last but not least in this discussion, and again, there's so much fodder for this discussion that the hour and a half that I had planned wouldn't have been enough. The hour isn't enough. And there's much more for you to look at and talk to me or to others about, to grants managers and federal geniuses in your own organizations. But Rahm Emanuel famously said, never let a crisis go to waste. The federal government has a longstanding tradition of not paying for improvements, but just paying insurance claims, for not enhancing resilience, but instead for waiting for the next disaster and doing a disaster supplemental for 50 or 100 or 150 billion dollars to pay for the damage that might have been forestalled or significantly mitigated or reduced had there been resilience investments. That's changing. It's changing because of programs like the BRIC program, which I mentioned, which is now going up. It's getting this next year, it will get 8 times as much money as it got 3 years ago when it was started. Protect grants, $8.7 billion, including $1.4 billion in direct challenge grants. You go to Pete Buttigieg's office and say, this is money that I need for resilience, a special carve out for equity resilience, but it's for transportation oriented resilience, but it is read so broadly that conservation is definitely in the thick, natural as well, nature-based solutions, as well as gray infrastructure that may involve conservation. And then disaster subs are just as real as they ever were, because there's always going to be damage. There was damage at Superstorm Sandy, and it was an area of intensely important habitat and open space. And a ton of money has gone into this area. There was in the Superstorm Sandy, which is of course the North Atlantic, right? There was funding for something called the National Disaster Resilience Competition, $1 billion. What can you do to innovate resilience? Well, the city of New Orleans came up with this great plan and got $124 million of that billion to come to develop a new water management plan that would actually forestall some of the damage that happened in Katrina and Rita. The Mississippi River Delta, I'm not going to talk about this because it would take too long, but it's totally cool. Talk to me at lunch. And so my conclusion, in concluding this very linear discussion, is the fact that this moment is ephemeral. The IIJA money is going to be around until 2026, and then it's gone. 22 through 26, and then gone. If there is Build Back Slimmer money, which I believe again that there will be, it's going to get spent out fast. There is an ocean of demand, and it still will be. It'll be a bigger puddle of money, but it's still going to be a puddle. And so, I am now your mother. Shame on all of you if you don't take full advantage of this moment. Shame on me. Shame on all of us if we don't fully explore that federal funding that's out there, make those linkages among programs, figure out those leverages, and lay claim to the money. So yes, now back to discussion. Thank you.
All right, we don't have a ton of time, but we're going to start with our live stream first.
Yes, first question. How do we go about improving capacity, staff, grant writing? This is a main concern of small organizations hoping to apply for federal funding.
It's a perennial challenge, and I don't know that there are great resources. You know that there are foundations like Hewlett and CERDNA who focus in on organizational development. And so there are resources in the philanthropic community to expand your reach. There are limited resources from the philanthropy trades. But I would say, you know, this is a pragmatic, if sad, reality. You've got to calibrate your desires to your reach and your capacity, right? And so sometimes that may mean having the staff or the volunteers of the board that can dig a little deeper on some of this stuff. Sometimes it may mean linking arms with a larger nonprofit that has more battle-tested experience in these programs. But there's no, I don't have a great answer. If you're small and if you don't have resources, then, and if you don't partner up with someone who does, then I think a lot of this funding will necessarily be elusive.
Hi, I'm Skip Wimmer, Defenders of Wildlife, Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape. Through the America's Beautiful Challenge that's out, Department of Interior actually has a sub-grant or a program that will actually fund capacity building to develop projects through NIFMAS. So I think the federal government definitely understands there's capacity issues. No one has the capacities to chase all these dollars, and that's the big challenge of how they're actually going to get the money out the door, because it is challenging to get challenged.
So I just note, I think Kent makes a great point. I'll note that the ATB challenge, as it's known, is basically the federal government took a healthy chunk of the IIJA money, $375 million for Interior Department grants for restoration, some fish passage money through Fish and Wildlife Service, some Sentinel landscape money that comes out of DOD, and said, we're going to package this together. We're going to give it to NIFWF. And we know that based on NIFWF's track record, they're going to amplify the benefits that we get out of this. NIFWF has a good sense to say within within our $425 million, which is what they've got, which is $80 million a year. Then that $80 million a year, we're going to build capacity if we can so that we can get better grants. We're especially going to do it when it comes to tribal constituencies, because Jeff Trandle at the foundation made a heartfelt commitment to the Secretary of Interior that there were going to be tribal benefits that came out of this program. But all of that said, there isn't generic federal capacity building. I'm working right now with the Department of Interior, Tales Out of School, to try to generate a better pool of applicants and better capacity of those applicants for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which is necessary. It is going to poorer cities. It's going to more difficult landscapes for exactly those capacity reasons. But they had a last grant round of $150 million. They granted out 60 million. And the rest of it is just sitting there because they didn't have the demand is out there, but the documented demand, the paper demand is not. So I think it's a huge problem. Don't make me end on a problem.
You have a question?
Thanks very much for the presentation. Mike Mwangi from Africa Regional Rep for International Land Conservation Network. I'm amazed at the amount of money available for the US through federal government for the environment. And I guess it's a reflection of it's the largest economy of the world. I'm just curious whether there's been a calculation between 15 billion that is available through federal government and demand for environmental programs across the country. And another question is whether some of these programs are available for cross-boundary or international engagements as well.
So of these programs, and that $15 billion number is my thumbnail, so please don't consider that bankable, but it's totally real. None of that money is, with the exception of some limited dollars that are available through North American joint venture for waterfowl conservation in Mexico and Canada. None of that is international. The international money that's available comes through the Department of Interior's international, you probably know this, Department of Interior's international programs, through State Department. And candidly, those dollars have not, they have not ballooned the way these dollars have ballooned. Maybe it's a function of navel gazing that you end up paying attention to your own body, but the federal government is putting money into federal conservation and conservation for its political subdivisions, states and localities, trying to honor its obligations to tribes. But there really hasn't been, and that's just something to chat about, there has not been a call to action for large increases in federal support for international conservation. Mike, I wish the answer were different.
And the calculus of the demand for what's needed.
So I think it's program by program. In some programs, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Federal Land Acquisition, that's the cleanest one. Every year they generate lists. The agencies generate lists hundreds of millions of dollars that they need. They get 100 million a year now with this increased money, or 75, which means that they have a constant backlog of additional funding need. And those individual projects are measured against each other in very technical ranking systems. But it varies. There are other programs where it's just catch as catch can, and that's especially the case where it's challenge grant money, which is some of the ripest pickings for all of us. If it's challenge grant money, that means all you have to do is put together a good application, talk to the right folks. If it is programmatic money that an agency has to come to its own decisions about, rather than having you just put together a good application, then you're on a different footing.
Jason Swan here with Trust Public Lands. It's going to be a really easy one here. I'm really curious your pitch for when someone says, well, you know, using the extractive industry to fund conservation, you know, what do you usually say towards that?
So that's a Land and Water Conservation Fund specific question?
Yes.
Absolutely. So what I say is that as long as we're drilling oil and gas off the coast of Louisiana and Texas and Alabama, that money's coming in. We're idiots if we let that money go to the Treasury so it can get spent somewhere else. Right now, there's a dedicated funding source. I don't feel a tinge of guilt. I do subscribe, and this is an ancient perspective and unreconstructed, I know, but I do subscribe to the tainted money, taint enough of it approach to funding. And so what I'd say is we are not selling indulgences, conservation indulgences, to the oil and gas industry. They are on their own footing. They have their own system with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to get their leases. And if the government decides to lease off oil and gas, then we need to grab some of the money. And if we arrive at a carbon-free economy where that money dries up, I will delightedly work with you and everybody in this room to find the successor funding source. But in the meantime, we got to take their money and do something good with it.
Fair enough.
All right.
And welcome to TPL, by the way.
Thanks.
We'll go 2 quick last questions from our 4th row ladies, and then we'll wrap up here.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Alan. Amber Moore, Fort Wood 2% landscape. So one of the things that keeps coming to mind, and Mike, it kind of falls in line with your question, is the challenge of having an international border and being an installation on the international border with Mexico. Is that we have a river, the San Pedro River, whose headwaters come out of Mexico. Is there a potential for international funding that we could look at that's going to benefit both countries and, you know, both populations? Especially because there's recharge projects happening on our side. If we could make it happen for both, that would be excellent.
So I have to ask you a question before I even try to answer that. And this is just something I haven't come across, so I don't know it. Are REPI funds not available outside the fence line except for North American lands, for United States lands?
That just came up. I don't believe that they are, but we can ask Kristen tomorrow.
I mean, it's an intriguing question. And again, I've worked in a number of installations, but none of them across the border. So I think, and I'm going to go back after this discussion. I'm going and looking at legislative and manual guidance just to see if there's any discussion of it. But now I'm realizing, well, I think it could be a challenge. That said, there are, maybe worth talking about after this, there are international conservation support programs that maybe could, not because it's a sentinel landscape, but because of the assets that make it a sentinel landscape, maybe there are some things that we can think about together.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ellen Lott with the Nature Conservancy. I have a gripe and then a question. No, my gripe is we have a national wildlife refuge in the priority area, doing great work with Fish and Wildlife Partners. They have money to spend and we've got projects to spend it on, but we're required to get a yellow book appraisal and you have to go through one agency. and they don't have, it takes a year or more to get an appraisal. So all of our projects are backlogged. So my question, I'll make it into a question. Will any of that money funnel down to support the infrastructure internally at the funding agencies? That's one question. I have one more after that.
Okay, so I'm going to answer it quickly so we can get to the second one and tell you, it's a two-part answer though. Part number one is they're already investing Great American Outdoors Act in organizational infrastructure in the agencies and at the departments, including at the Office of, what's it called now, AVSO, Appraisal and Valuation Services Office, formerly ASD, formerly OVS. So they're getting $19 million now instead of the 12 million that they got. So they'll have more money. Money is not the problem there. And this is something we can talk about over lunch. And if you want to hear gripes, then join me for this discussion. There is a proposal the Fish and Wildlife Service and Park Service have put across the transom to actually put appraisals back in the bureaus where they were removed in 2001, 2002, when OSD was created, when OVS was created. And so it may be that Congress, they just released today the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee draft bill that's going to be marked up tomorrow in full committee. And it criticizes AVSO for taking so long for appraisals and says that they want to report in 60 days on how the department's going to fix it. So you're not alone.
Great answer. Second question, what's your phone number?
There we go. Alan, thank you so much. Great presentation as always. In fact, pay you back for a little tip.
This is an emolument.
We'll take it from the swear jar to the tip jar now. So we're going to end the live stream feed for today. Hope folks are back here tomorrow, same time, 11 o'clock Mountain Time, for our next panel discussion on federal-private partnerships, which are going to go a little bit more nuanced into project development and opportunities there. And for everyone who's here and nice and hungry, lunch is currently set up upstairs. Give me just 1 second, Allison. We can stop the recording and go from there. Thanks, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. And over